I am a sick man. I am a spiteful man. I am an unattractive man. I believe my liver is diseased. This is how Notes from Underground by Fyodor Dostoevsky, published in 1864, begins. With these words, the philosopher introduces the novel's protagonist, who embodies the darkest side of human consciousness. An anonymous man who voluntarily isolates himself, despises society while simultaneously craving its attention, is consumed by his own intellect, and indulges in suffering as if it were an inescapable truth. Through The Underground Man, Dostoevsky warns of the dangers of an overly developed consciousness, one that becomes an unbearable burden, a labyrinth with no way out. This video explores key passages from this extraordinary work, analyzing what can be defined as the dark side of human consciousness. The philosopher does not simply write a novel. He crafts a manifesto against the positivism of his time, against the illusion that science and rationality can explain every aspect of existence. The Underground Man is not just a character, but a symbol of this rebellion. He asserts that pain is not an obstacle to be avoided, but an essential component of human consciousness. For him, suffering is not a condition to be overcome, but one to be understood. This perspective directly clashes with the idea of unstoppable progress that dominated the 19th century and, in different forms, continues to shape our present. The protagonist immediately presents himself as a sick man. But his illness is not physical. It is internal. He lives in a state of self-imposed confinement, aware of his inability to adapt, yet unwilling to accept a world that appears false and superficial to him. Every action he takes is driven by an almost self-destructive need to assert his independence, even when it leads him to pain and isolation. Man is phenomenally stupid. Even though he is anything but unintelligent, he is so ungrateful that you would never find another like him. This statement highlights a contradiction in human nature. Despite possessing intelligence, man proves to be extraordinarily irrational and ungrateful. The phrase phenomenally stupid does not imply a lack of intellect, but rather a behavior that defies logic and common sense. Ingratitude is presented as such an extreme trait that it becomes unparalleled. The Underground Man rejects the world, yet he is obsessed with it. He criticizes society, but longs to be seen. He despises others, but envies them. He does not seek to be understood. In fact, he seems to do everything possible to be rejected. In this sense, he embodies a universal aspect of human nature, the struggle to reconcile the need for autonomy with the desire for belonging. If you'd like to support the channel, your help means a lot for our future. Thank you so much. This conflict is especially relevant today, in an era where social isolation and alienation are increasingly widespread. Modern cities resemble Dostoevsky's St. Petersburg more and more, crowded, yet emotionally empty. People are surrounded by others, yet they feel alone. The Underground Man foreshadows this condition, illustrating the extreme consequences of a society that prioritizes efficiency and material progress at the expense of emotional depth. Dostoevsky confronts us with a paradox. I swear to you, gentlemen, that being overly conscious is a disease, a genuine, absolute disease. He argues that the more awareness grows, the harder it becomes to find peace. According to him, acute consciousness is a kind of curse because it prevents one from surrendering to instinct and the simplicity of life. The more one understands reality with clarity, the harder it becomes to adapt, as every choice, every action is filtered through an incessant internal examination. This hyper-awareness not only creates doubt and inner conflict, but also makes it difficult to find fulfillment, dragging the individual into a vicious cycle of analysis and uncertainty. The protagonist cannot accept the world as it is, yet he cannot change it either. He remains trapped in a spiral of thoughts that consume him. "Thought kills action," he writes, summarizing the condition of those who become lost in self-analysis and the inability to act. Dostoevsky's message is not easy to interpret. It is not a condemnation of consciousness, but rather a warning about its dangers. A life that is entirely rational and analytical risks leading to inertia and existential paralysis. The underground man is not just a critic of society, he is also a product of it, the result of a world that rewards conformity and punishes sensitivity. In an era like ours, where we desperately try to make sense of reality through data, algorithms, and predictions, Dostoevsky's words sound like a warning. Human beings cannot be reduced to patterns and numbers, nor can they be fully explained through reason alone. There is something irrational and unpredictable in human nature that cannot be ignored without consequences. But then, how can one embrace a better life? Would being less aware really be the solution? Would that mean becoming more foolish? And how could a deeply conscious person undo this state and return to a condition of non-awareness, of ignorance? The question is undoubtedly complex and touches the core of Dostoevsky's thought and, more broadly, existentialist philosophy. If excessive awareness is a disease, the solution cannot be a return to ignorance, because once a person reaches a certain level of consciousness, they cannot simply unlearn what they have understood. Pretending not to know, self-deception, or attempting to numb the mind are not viable paths without an even greater psychological cost. Instead, the path to a better life might lie in accepting one's consciousness without being crushed by it. Rather than fighting awareness or longing for lost innocence, one could learn to live with uncertainty, developing a form of detachment that is not indifference, but a greater ability to tolerate doubt and paradox. Philosophies like Buddhism suggest the path of the beginner's mind, which involves maintaining curiosity without being paralyzed by over-analysis, while some modern psychological approaches, such as acceptance and commitment therapy, encourage not rejecting mental discomfort, but observing it without being overwhelmed by it. Dostoevsky himself does not offer a clear solution, but throughout his novels, the idea often emerges that suffering, when accepted, can transform into a form of redemption. Awareness becomes an unbearable burden only if one experiences it as a condemnation. If instead it is embraced as an inevitable part of human existence, it can even become a guide toward a deeper understanding of life and others. And so, at the end of the work, the underground man remains alone with his consciousness, fully aware that there is no simple solution to the dilemma of existence. Dostoevsky, while not providing definitive answers, invites reflection on what it truly means to be alive and writes, "The secret of human existence is not only to live, but to know what one lives for." This phrase once again encapsulates the fundamental question. Without a profound sense of purpose, without a true understanding of oneself and others, life risks becoming a labyrinth with no exit. So what is the true price of awareness? And to what extent is it possible to understand oneself without getting lost in one's own thoughts?